Hello, everyone, and thank you for attending today's webinar, Transform Your Service Lifecycle with Automation, sponsored by Juniper. Before we begin, I wanted to cover a few housekeeping items. On the right-hand side of your screen is the Q&A. If you have any questions during the webcast, you can type your question into the Q&A box and submit your questions to our speakers. All questions will be captured, so if we don't get to answer you, we may follow up via email. On the bottom of your audience console are multiple application widgets you can use. If you have any technical difficulties, please click on the yellow Help widget with a question mark. Here you will find answers to many common issues. A copy of today's slide deck is available for download in the green Resource List widget. Towards the end of today's presentation, we'll ask for your feedback. A survey will pop open on your screen and will only take about a minute to complete. Your feedback is extremely helpful. An on-demand version of the webcast will be available approximately one day after the event and can be accessed using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier today. I would now like to turn the event over to Heavy Reading Senior Analyst, Teresa Mastrangelo. Teresa?
Thank you, Lisa. Good morning and good afternoon to everyone. We appreciate you joining us for this webinar to transform your service lifecycle with automation. We have a very full agenda today. Again, I want to introduce myself, Teresa Mastrangelo with Heavy Reading, and our main presenter is Wayne Chung. He's the Director of Product Marketing for SDN and NFV at Juniper Networks. So today we're going to talk about a lot of things. We're going to set up some market trends, discuss the problems and challenges that operators are facing in this new environment, new options and solutions that are available, discuss the elements of an automated NFV solution. Juniper will talk about its own approach, some conclusions, and then we'll leave some time available for Q&A. So let's talk about what's happening in the industry right now. As I would say, we have a perfect storm of change that has created a set of new expectations from enterprises in particular. And what we're seeing is a lot of inputs that are causing this change. Things like globalization, where businesses have expanded their workforce into a global economy, so there's a need to bring the services and capabilities of the enterprise to people wherever they're located at any time, anywhere, with the same availability and flexibility that they are expecting. Things such as outsourcing. We're seeing enterprises starting to outsource more and more of their non-core processes, and they'll continue to do that in order to reduce costs. Areas where we see kind of key motivations behind that is the scalability of their operations. Sometimes it's easier for a third party to help them with that scalability. Be able to standardize across the different locations, particularly on a global basis. And then in general, cost reduction, just kind of getting back to your core competencies and letting someone else handle the other areas. Things like the cloud. Cloud computing has changed the way a lot of operators and consumers provide the services and use the services. So it helps, it just changes the environment of service delivery. So a way to be able to leverage that in a more efficient, more integral way is very important to the future of those enterprises. Then we start to see some other things like machine-to-machine communications taking a big role, bring your own device, BYOD, coming into play more often. And these present a lot of challenges to operators. Being able to secure those services, being able to monitor those services, being able to make sure that they are working in the correct environment for that operator are very important things. So ways to make that more efficient in the way an operator provides its services. We see an increase in mobility. Customers and users want to be able to take their services and applications wherever they are, be able to access them at any time. So the demands have kind of changed from the old days where, you know, you did your expenses when you got into the office versus now you can get on your phone and actually submit your expenses into your office. So, and that's one very minor example of things. Big data. Ways to track and analyze the data across the organization, often in real time. So there needs to be techniques and ways to collect the data, store it, secure it, back it up, analyze it, and potentially monetize that data. so you can understand behaviors and see what needs to change in your service delivery in order to take advantage of those behaviors. So we're seeing a lot of inputs that are changing the expectations, and what we're seeing as an output from that is this need for anywhere, anytime, any device, on demand, pay-as-you-use environment. So it's a big change from the way businesses are working today. So with that, I'm going to hand this over to Wayne, where he's going to start setting up the problems and challenges and go into the solutions. So Wayne, it's all yours.
Teresa, thank you for that. And so, yeah, so we'll head into the problems and challenges first here. So with this perfect storm that Teresa has called out, really, is a great opportunity ahead of us. But with this great opportunity, we really have a set of traditional challenges that we are still encountering, and in this webinar we'll propose a new method to addressing that. So with this traditional set of challenges that we see, first and foremost, it's really a lot surrounds the capital investment that is required. As a product manager looking to develop a new service around the globe, right? We have a lot of uncertainty around the demand as we bring these new services and roll out these new capabilities into the market. We're not quite sure how much uptake there's going to be initially. So to take the traditional model of provisioning to the peak and having this fixed overhead model to address this is a very risky maneuver that has to be taken. So very challenging in that regard. Second is around the operational elements of this. And this is where this webinar will focus heavily on, is around how can we improve this through automation of that service lifecycle. So if we look at a couple elements of the service lifecycle, the time to deploy a new service from the ideation phase of a requirement that comes in from a customer to that of developing it can still take 6 to 9 months or possibly more. Then once the service is instantiated, how do I take an order and fulfill against that order? And that still can take 4 to 6 weeks of time. So customer expectations around that is a much faster delivery model today. And now once the service is delivered to the customer, the assurance of that capability and that set of services still is a very complex task, requiring a multitude of management systems that may not be very well integrated together. And then lastly, in this traditional model, with these two items I've listed above, really restrict the geo markets that you can enter into with limited choices and a static business model associated with it, which at the end of the day affects your bottom line revenue growth. So looking at these challenges, really the buying experience from an end customer perspective, they may see a fantastic suite of services offered through your capability set that you're deploying into the cloud. But if that service is requiring a traditional fulfillment model where you have to contact the provider, go through a lengthy cycle of time, that's not the expectation that cloud services have today. It really, this contact me button, it provides sort of a imagery of it being too complicated, very manual process oriented, hardware, very hardware intensive, and the bottom line is too long to deliver. So with the buying experience really that customers are expecting today, the bottom line is fast time to service. From the point of the time that a customer decides, there's a service that I need to build that into my operation today. How do I buy that now? And that's really the experience that we want to deliver to the customer. And that will, at the end of the day, increase customer satisfaction through the simplified and instant delivery model. But to achieve that, what we need is to have a fully automated service delivery and service lifecycle management. And so we'll focus on that very heavily today in terms of how do we achieve this goal. But beyond just that, many of these concepts, I think, are very much what we hear in the industry today. But the technology trigger that we've seen around SDN and NFV has created a peak of expectations. And so this chart really looks at, well, we've experienced this peak of inflated expectations with this technology. And that has driven sort of this trove of uncertainty in the sense of, well, can we really deliver against those capabilities that we're talking about with SDN and NFV? And so what we're going to focus on here is how do we look at solving some of those concerns around complicated pricing models? How do we compare a traditional delivery model with this virtualized SDN-NFV delivered capability set and compare that apples to apples with some business modeling associated with it? How do I look at making sure that the performance factors that the customer has been experiencing so far is still delivered in terms of SLA and QoS commitments? How do we scale this operation? If we can't scale this NFV capability set to deliver it globally and to mass market, then this will be very much, a set of false expectations that can't be executed upon. So we'll talk about that quite a bit. And lastly, it's the integration with existing infrastructure. So we look at it very much as a blend of a hybrid nature, of a blend of physical and virtual capabilities harmonized together to deliver these services. And so we'll touch upon that as well. So this next phase really requires a new way of thinking and really gets us into this plateau of productivity so that we can start to deliver against the promise of an automated service lifecycle. So with that, Teresa, I'm going to hand this back to you for a quick poll here.
Okay, thanks, Wayne. So we have our first of two poll questions in today's webinar. And the first one is really, what is your number one driver for using automation with SDN and NFV technologies? So your three choices are CapEx benefits for more flexible equipment costs, drive new revenue growth with rapid service delivery, and operational efficiencies that drive cost benefits. So please take a moment to choose your number one driver, and we'll take a look at the results and discuss them a little bit. So Wayne, while they're working on their voting, I wanted to ask you, and maybe this is something you'll talk further down, but are there any services that are too challenging to automate?
Too challenging to automate. So I believe that really we need to take a crawl, walk, run with this model. And really, I don't think it's about a service that's difficult to automate as much as looking at what the beginning steps of that structure is to what the utopia model of that is. And all too often, I think what we're finding is that we instantly gravitate to the end state goal and not taking a phased approach to this. And I'll touch upon this a bit in the slides below as to how to take a phased approach so that we don't try to take too big of a bite all at once.
Okay, so let's take a look at our poll results here. So, interesting. Almost, definitely a deadlock tie between driving new revenue growth with rapid service delivery and operational efficiencies that drive cost benefits. Any commentary on that, Wayne? It's interesting that CapEx was so far below the other choices.
And this is actually a very interesting result because I think this is very much in alignment to what we're hearing in the industry as well. It's really a balance between top-line revenue growth and that of operational efficiencies to drive cost benefits. And those are really the two lead drivers that we've seen driving the adoption of SDN and NFV technologies. So very, very, very interesting.
All right. I am going to hand this back to you to talk about new options and solutions.
Okay, great. Thank you. So the new approach is very much that of leveraging SDN-NFV technologies in a virtualized way. So very much, we start with that compute and storage layer built upon a cloud infrastructure, layered that with an NFV infrastructure that can still deliver those capabilities around SLA and QoS that are expected of the services today, but deliver that same capability in a virtualized world. And some of that may be a hybrid nature of physical plus virtual. Some of it could be purely virtual. Then we add on the network control layer. This is where much of that SDN control layer of building that overlay model to orchestrate the network delivery across a distributed cloud comes into play. And tie that back in with your business enablement layer, where your business logic functions need to also be able to control that underlying infrastructure that we've talked about. And adding that service catalog, building upon that service catalog with the additional virtual network functions that allow you to expand your service portfolio than what it is today. And this is where, in that poll, we talked about the 42% of service revenue growth. This is where the opportunity lies. But across all of that, we need to look at it with a very secure framework nature. How do we secure each and every layer of this operation? How do we automate the approach across the network delivery models? And then lastly, how do we build a management and orchestration layer that can interface with the business logic so that we can deliver these services based on the business needs of the customer? So that's very much the approach that we've got here, and we'll go through this in much greater detail. But this at a high layer is really what we're looking at offering. The key, though, is when we look at the technology, we also need to balance that with measured benefits that the automation layer can deliver. And what this means is looking at identification of those business practices or business metrics that are of importance to you. So what we've done, working with global service providers across the world, is look at some of these specific areas. For example, how can automation help in terms of ongoing maintenance activities and build more efficiencies into, let's say, upgrade cycles, reducing the downtime whenever I need to upload a new software load onto a system, those type of efficiencies that automation can bring, to that of faster deployment models, right? So the expectation that we talked about earlier is that customers are looking for on-demand instant delivery and not 4 to 6 week cycles of delivery. And that really kind of leads into this fulfillment timeline cycle from the moment a customer says, I'd like to order something, to them being able to select the service that they like, to ordering it, and to being able to have that delivered onto their network, and operational. That timeline is essential, and that's where automation can provide incredible amount of benefits. On average, though, if we take a look at all of these various factors, and this is only a sampling of some of those factors, we're seeing at least a 55% of, on average, operational benefit based upon an aggregate viewpoint. But I think that's the journey, or that's the beginning of this journey that needs to be taken, is to balance that technology layer with measurable metrics that we can see the benefits that automation can bring. So this leads a little bit to that question, Teresa, that you asked. Let's take a look at specifically, what the benefits that this can derive over time. And let's take a look at specifically a solution like virtualized CPE, which has shown up over and over as one of the top use cases that providers and customers across the world have consistently said that that's an area that we think that there's immediate benefits to an automated delivery model. But when we look at that, we have to look at it over a phase structure of time so that we can reap the benefits as we build in more capabilities and features of this. So initially, the cost element around CPE cost reduction is obviously top of mind, and that's where immediate benefits can be seen. But over time, we can see better improvements around inventory management simplification because maybe there's less hardware that we have to deal with. Better management of that means that building that up into your pool of inventory and incurring the costs of that infrastructure costs becomes a lot simpler to manage and much more cost efficient as well. And then lastly, if we look at new service introduction simplification, initially you might be looking at really migrating some existing services like VPN and firewall and so forth onto this new platform. But over time, what this investment of this automated delivery model with SDN and NFV can deliver is that new introduction of services. So as a requirement comes in from a customer for a new application, because of that investment in the NFV platform, we'll be able to spin up those new services much more rapidly. And that's really kind of that phase 3 approach is to expanding that service portfolio. You bundle that with, well, what are the revenue impacts of this? And so again, this is a phased approach over time, is that the revenue advancements will start to grow again over time as well. So initially there might be, a pretty flat benefit of faster time to revenue of those existing services, so that the expectation isn't of greater revenue, but of greater simplicity. But over time, this faster time to market for new services starts to appear, thereby increasing the customer satisfaction and as a result, reducing customer churn. And then over the really time, then we've got that new advanced set of services that will help to derive that top line revenue. So this is the way we kind of look at that benefit, and so that we don't set too lofty of expectations, right off the bat. So Teresa, back to you again for a quick poll here.
Okay, thank you. So our second poll question is in front of you. It's, where do you see automation having the most meaningful impact? So your 3 choices are, number 1, reducing errors with manual configurations. Number 2, accelerating delivery of new services through self-fulfillment. And number 3, improving mean time to repair for troubleshooting. So please take a moment to select your choice, and we'll go from there. So Wayne, I want to ask you about the previous chart where we're talking about, as it relates primarily to new revenues, new service introduction. And that's something I would say when we hear a lot of talk about SDN and NFV, there's always this push about how you're going to be able to drive all these great new revenues and new services, and they make it sound like it's going to happen tomorrow. And it's been my experience that, exactly like you said, a lot of the implementations are to make existing services more efficient. So my question for you is, do you see that timeline varying quite a bit from service to service in terms of phase 1 to phase 3? For them to actually start to see that revenue opportunity?
Yeah, so I think where we are in the marketplace is very much still in that phase 1 and 2 time frame, right? Looking at existing services migrating to this new platform and really the operational benefits of it. We're only just starting to see that experimentation around some of the new services, whether that be built on their cloud or maybe through a cloud service brokerage to link to additional clouds. So I think it's still a little bit early to see where we will, how long that cycle of time will take. But we do see experimentation around that front for sure.
Okay. All right. So I know what my response would be on this poll question. Let's see what everyone else selected. And I'm right in line with everyone else. So accelerating delivery of new services through self-fulfillment ranked very high. 68% of the respondents chose that one. Reducing the errors, that's an interesting one. I would think that definitely, some services are perhaps more prone to manual configuration errors. So Wayne, what are your thoughts on these responses?
I think those are really the top 2 that we would typically see. I think seeing the green 68% is, I think, very much in alignment to, the promises that SDN and NFV can deliver maybe that's a bit why the gravitation towards that. But I do think that the configuration simplicity of this and allowing less time to focus on that and more time to focus on new services, they really kind of go hand in hand a bit in the way we're seeing the evolution of this market.
Okay. All right. So moving forward, we're going to talk about the elements of an automated NFV solution. So Wayne, I'm handing it back to you.
Okay, thanks, Teresa. So we're going to now really get into the heart of it, talking really about several of the elements that we feel are crucial to this platform. And then we'll talk more about the specifics in terms of our approach, the Juniper approach to this. So in terms of this automated NFV solution, we hear over and over again that this is not meant to be a science experiment. This is meant to be something that we can take mass market. And therefore, the crucial element of that is being able to deliver this at scale. So first and foremost, then the first attribute of this solution really is an end-to-end scalable NFV platform. The second is that of a simplified service creation model. The third is an automated service delivery. And the last is an open framework. They're all of equal importance, and they all add different elements to this complete picture of delivering an automated NFV solution. And so we'll dive into this. With an end-to-end NFV platform that's scalable, what we really mean with SDN scale is not only the ability to manage a specific instance and say to be able to grow that instance and support a large number of user bases, but it also means being able to support a large number of virtualized servers within a single node. But beyond that, it also means this term that we've been working through is a distributed NFV cloud. And what that means is being able to offer these services where the customer or where the provider needs to run and operate it. So that could mean the data center. That could mean the next generation CO, or that also could still mean the customer premise. But the customer premise, the key element of that is a simplified device, whether it's a layer 2 NID that's very simple, or a virtualized compute platform that can run and operate virtual network functions in a distributed nature, even out at the customer prem. So what we mean by scale in this case is being able to centrally manage the orchestration and management of these capabilities, still conducted in very much of a service chain model, and we'll touch upon service chains quite a bit here, and being able to orchestrate that, at scale, right? And scale means being able to distribute as well. So that's a very, very key element to this approach. So that really leads to the next line item, which is about multiple deployment models, whether it's a centralized model, meaning everything is built in the cloud, whether it's distributed, meaning, again, out at the CO or out even at the customer prem, or a mix of all of them together, and also that of oh, sorry, I'm on slide 20. I just got a note, hoping that everybody else is seeing slide 20 as well here. Teresa or Lisa, could you confirm that, please?
Should be okay, Wayne. Should be okay.
Okay, thank you. All right. And so, so that of the distributed model, really, again, multiple locations, but still synchronized together, and being able to harmonize that function into a service chain. And then lastly is an overlay model, meaning that we can run this across an SD-WAN-like infrastructure and to be able to offer the same sort of services. Flexible DNF options, this is really the aspect of being able to build new services in an open manner. So building a platform that can extend itself to new services. And then lastly, it's a comprehensive set of professional services that can help you bring this to market. So the next set of attributes is that around a simplified service creation model. And what we mean by this is that of these services, typically, let's say in a managed service case, is a mix between VPN services and a wide suite of advanced security services, from firewall to unified threat detection models to antivirus or web content filtering. So how do we blend all of these services together and create a service portfolio that can basically create our catalog of managed services to the market? But to be able to orchestrate this and manage this requires a UI interface that can build the service in the back end. And we're looking at really a drag and drop service creation model that allows you to say, how do you build up a portfolio? How do you chain that portfolio together into a set of organized services that run in a certain fashion? And that's where this intuitive UI approach with building up services comes into play. That tied in with the analytics and intelligence based on, let's say, the statistics of your service so far, based on the success of it, based on different analytics that can be pulled from the usage base of a certain service, and be able to tie that back into the service creation model so that you can further improve and streamline that service. And really what we're looking at this point is security services is front and foremost around this managed services, set of services, and building up that rich service portfolio with this service creation approach. Then the next big area is that around automated service delivery. So now that we've built up, let's say, a service catalog and have a good idea of what we want to bring to market, how do we deliver the service in an integrated manner? And when we say integrated, that really pulls in the customer, the end customer involved. And where we see that end customer involved is through a user portal that they can choose that service catalog that was built in the previous slide, pick and choose the offering that they need, and then be able to say, click on it and be able to order that. What that then leads into is a comprehensive service orchestration of that capability set. So in a distributed manner, so how do we build up that service across the customer premise to the next-gen CO to the data center and orchestrate that across a physical and a virtual network layer? So that's what we mean by automated service delivery, which helps to reduce the delivery time down to minutes. The last piece of that set of attributes I laid out at the front was an open framework. This is important for the long-term evolution of what we're trying to build, because there's no way to predict today what's going to happen tomorrow or into the future after that. The only way to guarantee success around that is an open framework. And so what we believe there is an open source community for innovation. That's an important attribute so that the software can improve through the community. We have open standards, whether that be things for routing BGP or whether that be for configuration models through NetConf and Yang. That type of open set of protocols is of a critical nature to make sure we can integrate third-party elements into this. And lastly, it's that of open APIs. The innovation around this is going to be built upon the added capabilities that you can add to this platform. And whether that be integration of your business logic, whether that be building new analytic tools into this, but in order to be able to integrate that with the NFV platform, you need open APIs to support that application environment. So these are the attributes that we feel are of critical importance to that automated NFV solution. So how do we approach this? So in this section, we're going to cover really the NFV architecture in terms of applying it to automating your service lifecycle. So we break these down into 8 buckets. These are very heavily influenced by the MEF Third Network publication. And really, this is a look at a couple areas around order, configuration, security, policies, usage, analytics, performance, and assurance. These 8 elements tied together to really build that service lifecycle. And let's take a look at each one of these in some more detail using a specific use case. So if we look at a traditional CPE deployment model today, right? We've talked about this somewhat already. Limited markets, very hardware-centric, long time to delivery. This is the way we deliver CPE services today that really isn't so much meeting the customer expectations. So if we were to look at offering this in a new way, how would we still deliver the same set of services with the same expectation, but with much more flexibility, agility, and speed to deliver that to the end customer? So with virtualized CPE, the focus is really to be able to deliver these services in an orchestrated manner. So we look at the bottom left corner here. We have the customer premise who has a customer portal that can go and self-care their fulfillment or manage their ongoing service. On the premise could be a mix of a simplified layer 2 NID or a virtual CPE that basically is compute hardware that allows you to build VNFs. That's important because there are certain enterprises, certain vertical markets that require the presence of certain functions still on the premise. So to have that flexibility of operating and running this in a virtualized manner, but being able to support that on the premise is enabled with such a device. The next really is then moving back into the cloud, where we can offer and deliver the service really within a telco cloud. And the telco cloud could be within CO, within the data center, but orchestrated in a manner that is centrally managed through a service orchestration layer. So this migration really of new services or of these services and of new services into this telco cloud delivered manner is the way that we feel we can accelerate the delivery of these services. So I'm going to point you here to a showcase interview that was done by Kiriti Kampala. He's our CTO, as well as Stephen Saunders, the founder and CEO of Light Reading. We'll provide you this link later on in the Q&A, but it's a great interview of specifically talking about virtual CPE services. I think you'll find that very, very interesting. So with this, let's take a look specifically at that management and orchestration layer. We break this down into sort of 3 components. Let's start at the bottom here, at the networking layer. The networking layer really is an overlay management capability to orchestrate and configure network components, either that be physical or virtual across the network. In addition to that, it's the ability to chain those services together, whether they be MPLS services, firewall services, web content filtering services. How do we chain those services together across a distributed network? And we talked about that, where that could be in the custom prem, it could be at the next-gen CO, it could be in the data center. The networking layer should be able to orchestrate that across all those different locations. The second is really that of the cloud platform management and orchestration. So we handle the compute layer, the storage layer, as well as the network pool of capabilities and services, so that that becomes a central point that we can manage these distributed locations of server POPs across the CO or across the prem or across the data center. And then the last is really the service orchestration layer. We break this up into sort of three components. We have that network service design layer. We have a admin portal for the service provider operating the service. And then we have that of a customer portal. All of these integrated together really help to fulfill against this. And we'll touch upon these three areas a little bit more. Let's see. Okay, so let's take a look at the life cycle of a service in an end-to-end automated way. So if we look at this automated workflow, we really begin here on the left with a design and cataloging of the services that we have created ideas around. And what we mean by that is, again, building up that chain of services that we think are of importance to the customer, building that in a service catalog that can be offered to the customer via the portal. So with that capability being built into the portal, the customer then is able to order that. And when they order that, the magic really begins when they hit the submit button, right? Because that's when the heavy lifting occurs, where you have to fulfill against that service. And this really shows a chain of events from bootstrapping the CPE device so that we have the instance for that particular customer, down to then of managing the VM and creating the service chain through heat-based templates, so that we can build up that ordered service that the customer has requested. So that allows us to deploy the instance for that specific customer. Then we begin sort of a cycle of the VNF lifecycle management. How do we configure that VNF, whether that be a VPN service, whether that be a firewall service? These are all various VNFs that can exist that are configured through a Yang-based configuration model. We also might tie in physical network functions so that we can link the physical environment of this, whether that be, let's say, a PE router that needs to create a route instance back into the data center or into the customer premise. So there's a physical network config that ties these services and links them together. Then we move into, well, now the service is operational for the customer, and we move into a cycle of monitor, analytics, troubleshooting, performance management, and assurance of the overall service for the customer. So this is sort of that cyclical model that we have to go through of what the management and orchestration layer would manage for you. And if we look at that, again, distributed across the entire network here below, that's the propagation of that capability set across the different pieces of the network in a distributed way. But now we look a little bit deeper at a service design. When we have the ideation of a particular service, there are a couple key questions that orchestration layer needs to think through. And this is what that network designer will specifically deal with. First and foremost is, well, what type of VNFs are we looking at dealing with? What type of services are we trying to offer? And that will specifically make the decision for you as to specific VNFs that you want to incorporate. But that's really then only the beginning of that. using a DevOps-based set of tools, we then lead into the how. How do we onboard that particular VNF? How do we integrate that into our NFV platform so that we can continue to manage and operate it? And this is where openness becomes a very important play, so that you can onboard these VNFs using a standard space, interface model and configuration model. We then lead into a functional designer, a service designer, and a service configurator. This is where we start to build in the details of what specific function does that VNF serve. How do we design against that? So, for example, sizing capabilities to specific characteristics of maybe rule sets of your security nature, or if we're doing some web content filtering, what type of integration do we have with sources of information for that filtering. So this is where a lot of that designing and configuration of that service plays out. So then where do we apply this? So now I have what it is. I know how it's designed, but where do I place this? So is it at the customer site? Is it at the POP? Is it at the next-gen CO? Once we've decided where we place that, the centralized management system should be able to handle that and manage that resource and service chain that into the flow of the logic stream that the customers requested for. Then the process begins of, okay, well, I have a pretty good design around this now. How do I offer this to the customer so that they can, in an on-demand fashion, request for this particular service? And this is where the service self-care portal plays out to the end customer, choosing against the service catalog that you just built for, and being able to replicate this so that we have a service template model to be able to repeat these configurations that are of a reoccurring specific customer, or maybe that is a common set of services that we're seeing across multiple customers. How do you replicate that in a fashion that's automated? And that begins the service instantiation for the customer. So these are the questions or the type of things that service designer needs to solve for. So digging down specifically a little bit more into the service chaining itself, when we look at the orchestration layer, we also need to then look at that blend of, well, what do I have existing within the network, making sure that all of those physical elements are integrated into this orchestration layer, as well as adding those virtualized components in terms of VNFs into this, so that Contrail cloud platform becomes the cloud platform to orchestrate the storage, the servers, and the network layer for this. So once that's done, these dots here portray really the flow of that traffic that needs to flow. And there's a certain sequence, a certain ordering by which this traffic flow must occur. And that's what this specific automated orchestration layer will do, is to make sure that the routing element from point A to point B to point C is done in a very specific logical manner. And of course, this is done in sort of this automated manner that applies both the rules that we designed in the service designer, but plus adding in a bit of policy management associated with this. So there may be rule sets to achieve certain SLAs or achieve certain specific requirements that the customers ask for. And this is where the policy management of this will play out, so that we abide by the rules of the agreement that has been designed within the service. So this really kind of boils down to our overall end-to-end approach. We start off with our NFV infrastructure, There's really sort of a blend of physical and virtual devices here that allow you to build up that infrastructure to orchestrate this across an entire distributed telco cloud. The next is that of virtual network functions. Juniper has virtual SRX and virtual MX for these functions in terms of security and routing, but we also have a large ecosystem of VNF partners so that we have the ability to evolve those capabilities and applications with this open platform. And we ride that with a management and orchestration layer for the cloud platform management and the service orchestration management, as well as a piece that I didn't talk about in this particular session, but our North Star controller, which allows you to orchestrate across the wide area network to be able to fulfill against, again, the SLAs that might be requested of a customer. So that really comprises our management and orchestration layer to deliver these services. And across all of these elements and across all of these layers, we really have an automated approach across each and every one of these elements. You tie that in with that service lifecycle management that we've talked about around the service orchestration from ideation to creation, deployment, monitoring, and combine that with a professional services. So we have a team of professional services folks that are there to help you with the assessment first. How do you begin this approach? What do I have within my network that I can begin to deliver against this capability set? That to then being able to design and plan, design, and implement a phased approach to delivering against this NFV architecture, to that of operational and go-to-market support to help you bring this to market. So this really is our summation of our entire NFV architectural approach across platforms, products, solution, and services to deliver this into the marketplace. So I'm going to tie this really up with a conclusion here. Stepping back again, we kind of did a very deep dive into some of the technology elements that attribute for this automated service delivery. But what we began this session talking about is the metrics, the business operations that we want to improve with automation. And let's not lose sight of that, because that's really what we're trying to deliver here, is the ability to improve your top line growth through a simplified service creation model, expanding your total addressable market, expanding your market segments and vertical markets that you can penetrate into, really offering them an innovative set of services that achieves their business goals. Second is really bottom line growth. An automated service delivery model helps your operations to improve. And so this is where sort of when we did the poll at the beginning, it was a half-half split amongst these two as the top care abouts. And lastly, it's really that market relevance, being able to deliver a set of services that customers need through a flexible deployment offering really will improve your customer experience, and at the bottom line, improve their satisfaction and reduce churn. So that is really Juniper's big NFV idea. This is what we've been focused on. And I invite you to take a look at our website here at www.juniper.net/big-nfv-idea to find out a lot more about what we have to offer here. So with that, Teresa, I'm going to hand it back to you for some Q&As.
Thank you, Wayne. That was a great presentation, a lot of information in there. So I'm opening up the Q&A to the audience. If you have questions, please submit them to that Q&A box, and we'll get to a handful of questions before the hour is up. But in the meantime, Wayne, one of the things that I wanted to comment on was the market expansion opportunity. You know, historically, I would say in my 30 years of experience in this market that a lot of times when new services get rolled out, it's very market specific. Sometimes it's just the large markets where they think that there's more opportunity, but then you'll get an enterprise in a smaller market who really wants a service, but it's too expensive to get that service, or there's not enough demand in that particular market. So I very much like the concept that we can see much more ubiquitous availability of services across their entire footprint. That's something that I would think would be quite appealing as far as from an operator perspective.
Yeah, very much so. And really, this type of an approach allows for a bit of creativity or taking some risks, right? Because these ideas can be spun up with virtualization now without that sort of high-end equipment costs at the very beginning. So it really allows them to extend into these new capabilities and these new services and tap into new markets. And if it doesn't work out, then that equipment can very much be then respun and reused into things that are more successful. So it gives them a little bit of more risk-taking in that manner.
Right. We often hear, about service delivery, but there's also service termination. And service termination often comes with its own set of issues and costs, and, especially when you're contracted to enterprises to provide a money-losing service for whatever reason. But now it makes it also easier to terminate a service without a lot of risk. So certainly a good approach. So, Wayne, I wanted to ask you, one of the questions that we got is how is Juniper's automation approach different from your competitors?
Yes. So we have an approach that's very much, it starts with an architectural approach, very much an end-to-end model of delivering automation throughout the entire life cycle, right? So whether that be fulfillment to ongoing operations, to assurance, to the analytics side of it, being able to tie all those back together. So that end-to-end approach is key. And then secondly, it's our ability to tie these back into your business metrics. We have a team of folks that are specifically focused on really looking at the business operations and business benefits that you can gain through an approach like this. And that's very key, because taking this approach obviously can be very, very scary or very daunting, because it is a new approach. But if we can see the immediate impacts of this and phase those metrics over time, right, in terms of where is this benefiting me, if this is actually improving my capabilities or operations significantly, I may step on the gas pedal on that in that area. Or if if that particular element isn't working so well in terms of business metrics, then maybe that's not where I invest so much. So we have a team of folks that are focused on trying to tie those back into the studies around this investment, so both architecturally and business impact. So we see that as a key differentiator.
Okay. Another question we have is what areas do you see customers automating today? So we talked a little bit about virtual CPE, and that's certainly something that we see a lot of immediate value for the operators. But are there some other areas that you can briefly touch on that you're seeing high interest in automating?
Yeah, definitely. And some of these areas are maybe less exposed into the marketplace because they may be a bit more infrastructure orientated, and so they get a little bit less limelight. But we're really seeing a lot of interest in terms of cloud, cloud data center backups for data retention. So if a particular data center goes down, we have instant data recovery in another. We are also seeing growth in terms of elastic bandwidth growth, on-demand type of things, so that we can instantly burst network infrastructure to be able to support sudden needs that might be expected or unexpected. So we're seeing a lot of investment in that type of infrastructure level automation as well. So virtual PE is for private gateways or public clouds or PE aggregation points. We're seeing some interest in those areas as well.
Okay. And one final question before our time is up is related to the workforce. So what kind of workforce is needed to take advantage of this type of service delivery automation environment? You know, how experienced do they need to be? Is it someone who can just simply point and click, or do they need to be able to code and test and execute service fulfillment flows?
Yes, so that's a very excellent question. So we feel that there's two things in terms of workforce. Workforce in terms of alignment across marketing, engineering, go-to-market, operations. There's a workforce alignment that needs to take place first and foremost to bring sort of this DevOps approach to market. Secondly, in terms of the type of workforce, we're seeing a bigger shift towards a software-centric type of workforce nature, and that's where maybe, you know, in some cases some players may not have all of that in place. And there are specific partners and there's Juniper services that we've tied into to specifically help in that area to basically balance that skill set out so that everyone really can take advantage of this new approach. Okay.
Perfect. So with that concludes our webinar. If you could just take a moment to fill out the survey. It's only 1 or 2 questions for you. We'd really appreciate it. As Lisa mentioned at the beginning of this webinar, it will be available on demand tomorrow. Wayne, thank you very much for a highly informative and educational webinar on automation. I appreciate everyone's time today. Thank you for joining us.